Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG Podcast, episode number 95 of the show. I'm Ramon Mejia. I'm here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course, author interviews. And this week I have 9 new LitRPG titles just for you folks at home. First, start with The Dungeon Lord, The Otherworldly Powers. This is the second book in that particular series by Hugh Huesca. Also, we're reviewing Legends of Tarthirious, the last book in that series, book 5. Then on to But Death is Not Forbidden, a 20-sided I-series, book 2. Then on to Ghost Platoon, a mech lit RPG novel, Armored Souls, book 3. It's actually book 3, even though in the Amazon description it currently says book 2. After that, it'll be Fairwind's Fortune. After that, it'll be Demon's Quest. Then it will be the Omega Dream, and then after that it'll be the new party, Vertim, LitRPG, episode 1, and last but not least, Level Up. So there we go. But of course, we begin the show though with LitRPG news. And in LitRPG news, we're going to begin with our first story, which is going to be the audiobook readers. Review has a wonderful site that does free honest reviews of a lot of audiobooks. They also have a paid upgrade option for promotional work for audiobooks as well. The site has started an award program this year for audiobooks specifically. They have 18 categories for a bunch of subgenres for audiobook stuff, one of which is LitRPG. Now, the finalists include Awaken Online Precipice, written by Travis Bagwell and David Seipel. Also, Delvers LOC, Welcome to Ludus, written by Blaze Corvin and read by Jeff Hayes. Also in the finalist round is Dominion of Blades, written by Matt Dinneman, read by Andrea Parsonu. Also, Hero of Thera, written by Eric Newland and read by Jeff Hayes. Also, Reboot, written by Domino Finn and read by Justin Thomas James, and then Supercells and Superheroes, written by William D. Orand, read by Jeff Hayes. So Jeff Hayes is on a lot of these, and he's kind of made himself a voice of audiobooks for the LitRPG community, so it's really not a surprise that he's popping up all over the place. He does really good work. And these are some great ebooks. I've listened to some of them as audiobooks. The ones I've listened to have always been really good. All these titles, though, as ebooks, I've gotten good reviews from me as an ebook reader and a LitRPG reviewer. And it's really nice to see a special category of LitRPG audiobooks are for an award. So go there. We'll have a link in the show notes for you to vote for your favorite LitRPG. And we'll see who wins. So again, that's Awaken Online, Delvers LLC, Dominion of Blades, Hero Thera Reboot, and Supercells on Superheroes. So go vote. Also in LitRPG news, we have an announcement from Alaron Kong on his Patreon page. This was a public post. He basically says that The Land Book 7 should be out by February the 18th or sooner. I'm not going to be adding the title to the upcoming LitRPG list just because there have been a lot of broken release dates, and that's, so I don't want to get people's hopes up. I mean, I cross my fingers, sure, hoping that we get to read it this month. He does say it's 5 times as long as book 1, and he thinks it's his best work to date. So hopefully we'll get to read that as soon as possible. But I'm hopeful, but it's also moderated at this point. So there you go. Okay. Also this past weekend, I should say, Jeff Hayes, from the podcast on Audiobook Narrative that we just mentioned, he had a live stream on YouTube where he and 5 of the LitRPG authors hung out, drank, gamed a little, and then drank some more. I was lucky enough to be invited to the group to join them when I showed up to watch, just as a spectator. It was a really good time. There was Harmon Cooper, Dave Wilmarth, Hugo Heska, and let me see, there's one other person there. I'm sure he'll let me know who it is, though. In addition to Jeff Hayes. And so there have been, it was a really good time for us. We joked a lot. There was a lot of drinking. And yeah, Charles Dean, sorry, my brain froze for a minute. Sorry, man. Because I know he listens to the podcast. I'm like, Charles Dean, that's who the other person was. But everybody was drinking, everybody was laughing, having a really good time. We tried to play Pillars of Eternity for a little while, and we got to a few of the quest points, and it just kind of devolved into us talking about a bunch of nerdy stuff, games, drinking. By the 4-hour mark, everybody was rather drunk, or at least very buzzed, and you could tell by how the conversation turned to some very other things like taxes and other stuff that was really weird. So I encourage you to go watch if you just want to watch five guys who are in kind of the same industry to chat and talk about the things that they love and do a little promotional work for their individual projects and novels and stuff. But it's generally really good time, so go check it out. We'll have a link in the show notes. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Jeff Hayes' YouTube page. Okay, now out now, where there's some stories that have come out this week. Haven't had a chance to review them or look at them, including Seven Talon, Dragon Rider's Fury, The Grind, and also Arthur Stone's Respawn Lives 1 through 5. Now, Arthur Stone is also the author of the Weirdish Noob series, so you might recognize that name there. A few new LitRPG audiobooks have come out this week as well, including Meridian Gate Online Imperial Legion. That's the fourth book in that particular series. We also have The Builder's Wrath, Legendary Builder Book 4 out as an audiobook, as is The Twilight Obelisk, Mirror World Book 4. That is also out as an audiobook. And The Airship, a futuristic dungeon core book 2 in that series, The Laboratory. It's The Airship, The Laboratory Book 2. That's the name of the series, written by Skylar Grant. So go check out all those audiobooks as well. Most of those are really quite interesting and have generally good reviews, but you can, of course, check out the actual reviews for the ebook versions. We'll have a link in the show notes for those if you want to refresh your mind as to what it was about before you go investing 20, 25 bucks in an audiobook. Sometimes we're using your Audible credit. Okay, upcoming LitRPG. This is just where I read out the stuff that I know is coming out in the near future. Some things have changed, some dates, and we have a couple of new things as well. Way of the Shaman, Clan Wars, Book 7 and 5 of Slim Hinko. This is the last book in that series. It actually has a release date out, so it's a pre-order. It should be come out on February the 10th, 12th rather, which is just this upcoming Monday. So go pre-order if you want to, but it actually has a full release date. CC, the author did know what he's talking about. It's going to be a February release date. Also out on February the 16th is going to be Fantasy Online, Runestones of Trintignant. I'll say that's what it's saying. I don't know. Out in February on the 28th is going to be Kingdom Level 4. On the 20th as well is going to be Dragon Seed, a LitRPG Dragon Rider Adventure. On the 28th of February as well. A lot of books come out on the same exact last date. Avatar's Rising. On March the 6th, it'll be Restart Paladin, Dark Paladin Book 3 in that series by Vasily Mihenko. And let's see, on March the 15th, it'll be Permadeath Online Book 2. And of course, last but not least, March 16th, Achilles' Reign, Patera Online Book 4. So there we go. On to new releases and reviews. And any releases and reviews, we'll begin with a review of Dungeon Lord, Otherworldly Powers, The Race Hunt, a LitRPG series, book number 2, written by Hugo Huasca. He was actually on that recent thing with Jeff Hayes that we did last week, and so you can hear him talk about it a little bit. Okay, this one is 462 pages, $5.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. I will read you the author's description. Dark forces are threatening everything that Dungeon Lord Edward Wright cares about, and they don't expect what they're about to get. Only a few weeks have passed since the Battle of Barova, and Edward and his friends are busier than ever improving the hunt and protecting the surviving villagers. Sadly, time is a scarce commodity in the world of Ivabas. Soon enough, Ed finds himself thrown in conflict against the man behind the Mind Wound attack. A man who is seemingly capable of shrugging off mortal wounds and is willing to unleash a devastating plague of undead against the hunt and everyone inside. Only the otherworldly powers of a dungeon lord may be capable of protecting the hunt against the rapidly approaching danger. But can Edward remain the same man if he exposes himself to the corrupting influences of that very same power? Honestly, when I was reading this, I was like, that tells me nothing about this story, and I've read it. So the description doesn't really do a really good job of like telling you what's actually going to happen in the novel, or giving you more than super vague hints. It's really a combination of an adventure outside the dungeon and outside the local area. The main characters go to like a larger city. There's also some dungeon building, thankfully, and some dungeon defense stuff here. So those are kind of the core concepts of this particular novel. It all kind of begins and hinges on the beginning of the story when Ed, the dungeon lord, is sent to help a thief named Catelyn escape from a group trying to sacrifice her to her evil dad, who has been summoned from the dead as a monster. And that's really just like the first few percents of the novel. From there, bad people start to realize that Ed's a dungeon lord, he should be killed, and they become a threat to him and the dungeon. There's also this kind of middle section, which I thought was a little bit out of place from like this really tense like build up that reminds me of like a 1920s rum running story. It's a little weird, it's entertaining, but it's also like a cool time period between like really exciting parts, and you get a lot of fighting in the story, so all those things are incorporated. But one of the big things about the story that I think is an improvement for book one, it's the actual dungeon building. Well, it's more like dungeon housing projects, but there's definitely some crafting and some like town building kind of stuff going on in there. And I'm a big sucker for crafting, so that's always a plus for me. But however, I think like the dungeon building side of the story is always going to feel more like town building in this particular series. Then that's mostly because the main character isn't evil. He's not the kind of character who has the intention of like murdering adventurers and people for their resources. So it's not ever, this is my hypothesis, it could obviously change as the author writes a series. It's never going to be like a real dungeon master story, even though it's called Dungeon Lord and there is like a little bit of dungeon building. It is more like town building for this particular section so far, but it's still enjoyable for me at least. Overall, besides a few like translation snafus, like calling chicken coops chicken dens for some reason. It's a really good read. But even those mistakes were entertaining in their own ways. For me, I'd get reading it. I get to score 7 out of 10. That's Dungeon Lord, Otherworldly Powers, The Wraith Hunt, a LitRPG series book 2 with a score of 7 out of 10, an entertaining read. Okay, on to our next review. Legend of Tarthirious, book 5 of Kylia's story, Legends of Tarthirious, book 5. It has that 5 in there twice. This is 197 pages, 99 cents, so a good price. Available on Kindle Unlimited as well. This is the author's description. Kylia is struggling to deal with the recent death of her fiancé, Gerald, and decides to do the only sane and sensible thing: throw herself into the virtual world of Tarthirious. In Tarthirious, Kylia's avatar, Amelia, is having struggles with morality and whether or not the pesky thing is actually important when it comes to having a good time and completing quests. In this, the fast-paced and action-packed conclusion to the Legend of Tarthirious saga, the story twists, turns, and surprises at every corner as it reaches a stunning climax, whether Kylia is ready for it or not. So there you go. I like having fun with voices. Kylia, the main character in this particular last book in the series, has hit depression and is playing the game nonstop. And this one kind of switches up as far as like the online story goes, in that the main character chooses the path of evil, or maybe not just good, for something new and fun to do. And most of the story is just her doing things in game. You can tell that the author is rushing a bit to kind of end the series, tie up all the loose game quest lines, and it's done in a very entertaining way. But it honestly feels like, well, I'm of two minds about it. One, it feels like to me like the author just kind of is kind of giving up on like a consistent plot within the in-game storyline, because it doesn't really matter in the first place, and he's just kind of having fun with the story at this point, because he knows he's ending it. And so some of the things the main character does in game, very entertaining, very unlike what she's done in the past though. And it is kind of like the less, not necessarily evil, but like, I don't care, I'm going to do what I want to do kind of storyline, and it's entertaining in its own way. But on the other side of that is that it doesn't matter. Like, the game stuff in this entire series ultimately turns out not to really matter at all. And I mean, that's kind of disappointing for me, because the first book in the series really does set it up as something important to the storyline. Like, the main character gained specifically because she had to earn a living, had to pay back her and her dead family's portion of the national debt, or she was going to lose her citizenship and be deported. And as the series progressed into book 5 especially, all that gaming stuff was just, it didn't matter anymore. Like, the storyline shifted in the real world so that she was never going to ever get her citizenship, and it was never really going to matter. And that's still the case in this particular novel as well. But at the same time, again, the stories in game are still entertaining. It's just that there's always that sub layer of like, this doesn't matter to the story. So it kind of took away my enjoyment a little bit. And the real storyline completely cleared up as well in the last 15% of the novel. It wraps it up. And if you just want to know what happens to Kylie as far as like that storyline goes, pick it up on Kindle Unlimited, go to the 85% mark, and you'll see exactly what happens, because everything before that, again, doesn't really affect the real life stuff in any way, shape, or form. And that's just how the series ended up. I don't think it started out that way. I'm not sure if it's the author's intent at all, because book one very much feels like game stuff matters. And then as the series just kind of went its own direction, those two paths kind of diverge as far as like, oh, what actually is going to matter in the story. And that's just the way these things happen sometimes. But for me, I wanted to like it more than I ended up happening. Again, and it was more because of that fundamental idea of like, oh, the game stuff doesn't really matter in the story, and they almost felt like separate short stories in a way. So for me, it gets a score of 6 out of 10. Now that's Legend of Tarthirious, book 5 in Kylia's story, with a score of 6 out of 10. Not quite good, unfortunately, but not boring either. So there you go. Okay, on to our next review. But Death is Not Forbidden, the 20-sided I series book number 2. It is 349 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited, written by, of course, Kip Tarrington. Excuse me. Okay, here's the author's description. Spooky and Joe are in a gaming reality that is quickly becoming clear is quite real. They are forced to fight monsters, dungeons, and betrayal, but their greatest enemy might be denial. Both Joe and Spooky are now nearly immortal, but how will Joe react when the facts of the situation can no longer be denied? He may never see his late wife in the afterlife. How will Spooky deal with the changes within herself? Neither she nor her co-champion have the option to become mere mortals again. Watch as Joe and Spooky continue to grow their capital in people, skills, equipment, and magic. Okay, and as you can tell from just that, the way that the description is worded, there are occasional grammar and spelling issues in the story, but to me they weren't really too noticeable. The first novel in the series, in a lot of ways, has like a huge amount of setup. It's hinted at additional kind of gaming mechanics, including like dungeon diving, time building, crafting, community building, those things. And in book 2 in the series, that's the first it gets fleshed out. Like you actually get to see some of those things come to light. Remember that book 1 is also essentially the main character's first day in this fantasy world, and like I said, there's a ton of setup for it in book 1, and book 2 is actually going to be the first week and a half, so a little more time. But at the same time, a lot of those things that are being developed in the story in this novel, in this book 2 in the series, aren't developed by the main character. Instead, much of the novel focuses on Spooky, his AI fairy companion. She's the one who dungeon dives, she crafts, she town builds. She also goes into a little bit of multi-personality split, but it's a cool mechanic. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but it is enjoyable. It's a very interesting way of developing a system of progression. And if you look at, like I said, if you look at the actual cover art, it shouldn't be a huge surprise that this is not about the main character. That it's about someone else. If you look at books 1 and 2, they're different covers for a reason. So just don't be surprised that a lot of the story is not about the main character. Joe, and it says this is about Spooky. When Joe does appear, he's kind of bookends the story. He fights, he levels, he gets new powers, he does some community relation stuff. But again, he really does fall asleep on the job here, and he leaves an opportunity for the other characters to get some development time. And that's not just Spooky, there's other characters in there as well. And there's some intrigue, there's some character development for people who might consider minor characters in the first book a little bit. So everybody gets some time in the novel, but like I said, a lot of it, like 55-60% of it, does focus on Spooky. So if you're not a fan of her character, you may not enjoy this novel as much as you did number 1. Like I said, it's an interesting story for me. Like, I like her plot development, I like her character arc. It is very interesting. It's a very interesting introspective of like how an AI being who is in our world, who's translated into a physical reality of a magical system world, would try to adapt. And like I said, it's a good story to me. I had a good time, but I understand that everybody is, because it doesn't focus on the same main character as it was in book 1. So just an FYI, I'll let you, heads up about it. Gets a score of 7 out of 10 for me. That's But Death is Not Forbidden, the 20-sided I series book number 2. I enjoyed it. I had a good time. So that's a score of 7 out of 10. Okay, on to Ghost Platoon, a mech LitRPG novel, Armored Souls book number 3. Again, in the Amazon description, it says Armored Souls book 2, but this is actually the third novel in this particular series, written by Xavier P. Hunter. Okay, this one is 330 pages, $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here is the author's description. A dying game, a tournament for the ages, one last chance for glory. After a glorious run as the world's first full immersion VR metagame, Armored Souls is on its last legs. Competitors are on the rise, and the company's own projects are surpassing it. In a last-ditch effort to inject new life into the game, Valhalla West announces a tournament with such an awesome prize that no player can resist. Reggie has led Wounded Legion to the top ranks of the factions on the Armored Souls servers, but the game has gone easy for him. Too easy. When Valhalla West announces their tournament plans, Reggie springs into action to prepare for it. His motives are twofold. First, it's the most excitement he's felt in years. But more importantly, Armored Soul is Reggie's entire world. He's willing to fight to keep it going as long as he can. So there you go. Now this is also another Endua series, and it also feels like it. Not only does the story tell the tale of an MMO that's becoming stagnant, but it's on its last legs. But it's also the last book in this series, and it's also very evident that it's the case. In the story portion of it, Reggie also recognizes, in a very meta way, that his story is coming to an end, at least in the Armored Souls video game world, and that he's okay with that. There's a lot of like meta, this is the end kind of stuff, whether it's going to be end of life, end of the video game, servers going down because they're not popular, or other games that have passed them, or the end of the series. It's all there as like this kind of subplot that's repeated a lot. This novel is very heavy on mech combat, and if you like the fights in book 1 and 2 in the series, you're going to like the ones in this 1 and 2. If you don't like it, why are you reading this up to book 3? I don't know. But that's mostly what it is. It's a series of fights in the tournament. There are some moments where the fights are broken up, like between fight bouts in the tournament, where the characters get a chance to cool down. There's some character development. There's some very human moments there. But again, most of it is just mechs fighting each other. And that's what the series has been. There's very little RPG progression in this particular novel, mostly because all the characters have hit max level. And they've already decked out their mechs to the max. That's part of the storyline, that the guild for the main character has already kind of gone as far as it's going to go, and he's been playing for 5 years, even though for him it feels like 10 or 20 sometimes, and he as his character in the game has gone as far as he can, and so he's starting to get bored as well. The story ended very well. It was a good ending. It wraps everything up nicely, and even if it didn't go it went the way I thought it was going to go. Again, because this is very obviously like the last book in this particular series, at least in the terms of Armored Souls universe. And I was like, okay, but again, there was always still that underlying thought of like, this is the end. So all this game stuff that I'm reading about doesn't matter either for the storyline or for, the plot. I'm like, and so even then again, it's always seems to happen. It happened that other book I reviewed earlier. It sort of drew my enjoyment down a little, because I know all the game stuff. I was like, oh, it's ending. And so, and that's just kind of the way life is sometimes. It ends, and it's always not always satisfying. And so this one gets a score of 6 out of 10. Again, not boring, just not good for me either. But it is definitely an ending. And if you're a fan of the series, you'll want to read it to see how it ends at least. So that it is what it is. Ghost Platoon, a mech LitRPG novel, Armored Souls book 2, with the score of 6 out of 10. There you go. Okay, on to our 5th review, Fairwind's Fortune by Chris Schnee. I hope. Okay, this one is 111 pages, 99 cents, so good price. It, however, is not available on Kindle Unlimited. I'll read you the author's description. In 2038, Gale plays Thousand Tales, a game run by a watchful AI. In there, she's exploring an endless sea to gain aquatic powers and master the rare skill of combining origami. Of combat origami. In the real world, she helps run an ice cream company and is starting to see robots sneaking around the place because the AIs plan to go beyond keeping players entertained. Her real and fantasy lives collide overnight when she has a bout of extremely good luck and the chance to have her brain permanently relocated in the game's world. Is digital heaven too good an offer to pass up? There we go. So, again, 111 pages. Most of the story is like a slice of life adventure. The main character, Gale, is an explorer, crafter, mentor. In game, she wins a lottery and decides to upload her mind to the games she's playing. That's kind of the theme of the entire Thousand Tales universe written by the author. Is that technology arrives where people can become digitized. There's a much like thicker book series. This is almost a short story in the novel in the world. That's a standalone short story. But like in the larger series, it's like a whole cyberpunk kind of metaverse game thing going on there. And it's very interesting. These side stories, however, are not as interesting. One, to really appreciate them, you have to read the original series, even though you can kind of get by without it. But a lot of these independent stories, these smaller stories, are really about one person's version of heaven, because that's what this online universe ends up being. People upload their brains, their bodies are dead, like their brains literally get sliced up so they can get uploaded into this world, and so they only exist digitally. At the same time, within this meta universe, within this online universe, they can be whoever they want to be, whether it's going to be human or some animal, or evil, good. They can have their own private universes where they can be a god or a hero or whatever they want to be. And that story is kind of interesting, but that's also part of the main like trilogy storyline. In these particular short stories, they're one person's version of that, and they're often just like adventure kind of stories with like light RPG mechanics, and that's kind of what this is. This is a short story entry that ties into that universe, and it's okay. It's not particularly amazing because you don't get that same kind of ethical morality questioning that you do in the main series. It's more like, oh, this is just what happens with the character. And if you're into like slice of life series, it's not bad. It's not particularly awesome either, for me at least, because the game mechanics are never really the focus. It's not as much about like, we're going to go on an RPG adventure, we're going to go level up, we're going to go, do a bunch of game things. It's more about the character's journey through a digital afterlife and what it is for that character, what heaven is essentially is for that character in a kind of a way. And so there's a variety of tales, but they all kind of thematically go over in that same core idea. So it's like, I've read a few of these before, and I'm like, okay, it's not bad, it's not boring, it's just not as entertaining as it was the first time for me. So keep that in mind. I give it a score of 6 out of 10. That's Fairwind's Fortune with the score of 6 out of 10. The main series is a little more entertaining. There you go. Okay, on to Demon's Quest, Grimdark Adventures Online Book 1. Written by Tom Gallier, author of The Quest into Hidden Realms. There you go. It is 248 pages, 99 cents. That might be a temporary deal. Available on Kindle Limited, though. Here's the author's description. A gamer girl plays for her life. There are 7 stages of grief. Tatiana finds herself stuck in anger, diagnosed with an inoperable terminal brain cancer. She rails against fate as her choices get taken away one by one. Only 2 things prevent her from going to the 6th stage, depression. The first is Grimdark Adventures Online, where she has 2 characters. One, a brutal male battle knight, the other, a gorgeous rogue. The second liberating thing? Insurance. When her real-life body dies, the insurance will allow her to escape extinction by paying for her upload into the game as a permaplayer, ensuring that she never reaches the 7th stage acceptance. She need only choose which character her consciousness will inhabit. Perma players can't level up as quickly as other players, so Tatiana spends her last days in the hospital playing the game, leveling up where she can and venting her rage in battle and mayhem. When a demon in the game threatens to steal from her her final choice by permanently killing both her characters, forcing her to upload as an unknown at level 1, Tatiana knows desperation. She must either exceed the demon's wishes by going on a quest or meekly accept the unacceptable. Backed by a flying dragon, she sends her rogue character into the unknown to battle orcs, mages, cannibalistic goblins. Determined to win through despite the odds, she refuses to accept the impossibility other than victory. But even she should win through. She can only hope that the demon will keep his word, freeing her to make her final choice before it gets made for her. Okay, that's a lot of stuff that's promised in the story. Not all of it delivers. Very much so the first paragraph in the description describing like, oh, has an improbable disease and she's going to die and she's going to get uploaded as a perm player. That is very much not in the story, very much. It introduces, at the beginning of the novel, starts her as this male character who's a berserker and he's in this huge armor and he's a dude. It's just him fighting. Okay. And then it transitions to like the real life where she happens to be a girl sitting in a bed playing a VR game. And then she switches into her other character. It's just the beautiful rogue. And that's the character that you see the entire story, because she doesn't leave there. And that other plot line of like her being perma uploaded is not described in the actual. The only time you actually really see that, for the most part, is in this novel description. So like that, it's not really a thread. This is really just an easy review for me in general. It's a boring story, at least for me. The core premise of the entire novel hinges on a player believing that some random voice in her head is a demon, and that he's not only worried that he's a program and that she's a player, but for some reason he has the power to delete her main and all characters, which is not established in the story prior to like it coming up as being possible in any way, shape, or form. So the main character, instead of logging in, reporting it as a bug, she just kind of accepts, oh, I guess, oh, sure, voice in my head that I've never heard or before, I'm going to believe that you can delete my characters. And again, because it's not established beforehand that she plans to permanently upload, it doesn't make sense why that's a threat in the story. It's the only place you hear them even mention is in the novel description, which I just read to you. It's not in the actual story yet. And that's the decision that it hinges at, but it doesn't really make sense, because why is this demon suddenly self-aware? Why does he have the power to like delete characters, which is again not established in the actual story, that it's true. She believes it. And that kind of sets the tone for the novel, at least for me. It's like, it's a story that somebody had, and it feels very forced at times. And anytime there's an issue with the plot, it's just the author magic wand waves and, oh, look, it's solved by some suddenly discovered ability, power, or other means. Like the demon will suddenly have some power that he never talked about that solves that particular problem. Like, for example, the main character, when he's first introduced, when the demons first introduced him, she's dead. Her character has been stabbed. She's a rogue. It's her old character. She went in for some quick fun, and she got murdered by some NPCs. So she's actually dead, and the demon possesses her body, and basically threatens her, and she believes him, and suddenly he can heal her back to full health. And then suddenly she can murder a whole full room full of like other players naked and unarmed. And it's just a lot of that stuff happens in the story, and it hurts my logic part of my brain, because I'm like, this doesn't make sense. These game rules shouldn't allow this. And like, this is a lot of plot armor and like a lot of wand waving to get the story where the author wants it to go. And this includes like a lot of other things, like her challenging an entire guild full of high level players, even though her character is relatively low level. And, winning, or like stealing a dragon mount with no like other consequences. And a bunch of other stuff in there. So for me, that was an issue. On the game mechanic side, things are super light as well. There's plenty of like game references, like, oh, we're in an MMO. Here's some game terms. But the actual game mechanics are really limited to like seeing an occasional character description, short character sheets, a health bar during combat, which is fairly regular. But everything else written in the story really just feels like it's a straight fantasy story. And so for me, for those two particular reasons, I was really bored of the story in general. I get to score 5 out of 10 for me. That's Demon's Quest Grimdark Adventure Online Book 1 with a score of 5 out of 10. So there you go. Okay, on to the Omega Dream, written by Tyson Pruninsky. It is 290 pages, $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. The author's description. With the innovation of fully immersive virtual technology that links directly to the user's mind, the world of console gaming has evolved in 5 years beyond what all but the most ambitious of gamers could imagine. Unfortunately, that technology comes with a few quirks. When a young boy named Aaron Marcus got his hands on his first Neuro console, it was a dream come true. He could finally join his other friends who had long since delved into the virtual MMO known as Omega Dream. It all turned into a nightmare when a tragedy strikes and he becomes unable to return back to the real world. Discovering he is but another in a long line of players trapped inside of the artificial realm, he resolves himself to do whatever it takes to make it out. He begins his journey through Purgatory, the server built to house the damned players, cursed to spend the rest of their days inside Omega Dream. It isn't long before he finds out just how difficult his quest may be. Only one player has ever escaped the virtual prison, and only time will tell if Aaron has what it takes to be the second. So there we go. 290 pages, $4.99. A little on the expensive side, but it's also available on Kindle Unlimited. Now, this is the debut novel from author Tyson Pruninsky. As such, it's understandable and everything is going to be perfect, and this isn't, unfortunately. The game mechanics in the story aren't the big draw, and while constantly being used in the story, there are issues. I'll say that the story has all the pieces to be a good story. It's just that they're kind of in the wrong order. So there are actual mechanic issues, but there are also story issues. And I'll get into them separate a little bit. First, the game mechanics. The game mechanics in the story are rushed, and much of the information is presented in such a way that they feel like they're being made up as the story goes. I'm not saying that the author did that. He probably planned everything out very well. Having read the entire thing, you can see that there's a lot of thought about everything as the main character progresses, all the mechanics in the system. But as you're reading it as a person, as a reader, there's no setup. There's no gradual introduction to the system. The main character starts out in the story already at level 30. So he already has a bunch of powers. And the beginning part of the story is just him doing stuff. And then sometimes remembering to explain it, like what these mechanics are. And you're just following him on this journey as he's killing monsters, using powers, and explaining things. And that's just a consequence of starting the main character at level 30. Yes, you kind of get to jump into the action. That's a benefit of it. But at the same time, you're missing that opportunity for the main character to learn the mechanics as he's being introduced to the story. Like if it was a level 1 story, like when the main character is starting a new character, there's a reason why a lot of people start out that way, because as the main character learns about the game world, as the main character learns about the storyline and the mechanics of the world, so does the audience. So there's a very natural progression of a gradual revelation of these different things. But by starting them at level 30, you kind of miss that opportunity. At the same time, the other benefit is, of course, that you just kind of jump into the action, and it's just a story choice. While the story becomes a little bit better as the story goes on, the game mechanics, like factions and resources nodes, although cool, end up being like info dumps. More or less, I'm going to talk about factions and resource nodes. Here's a bunch of information for you, the reader. Like, this is what they are. And I'm like, okay, that's also another way of doing it. It's just, it doesn't always mesh well with the story because it feels like it's an interruption in the flow of the story. So it just is what it is. The story itself is fundamentally an action story. Fight scenes dominate the first 75% of the novel, and again, they're decent action scenes. They're very game centric. The fights are the novel's strength, but it's also its biggest weakness. It's a strength in the fact that they're well written. Very good action scenes individually. There's a nice variety of opponents. The types of fights the main character is involved with is also varied. It will go from tournament style to infiltration to flag defense to full raids, and then guild versus guild battle. So there's a good variety of types of fights. Now, as its weakness though, in the sense that that's all the story basically is. It's a series of fights, and the connective tissue between those fights really doesn't provide a lot of interest. Or really give you any reason to even care about the outcomes of those fights. The story outside the fights is also a little bit fractured as far as what the story is trying to be. It goes from a story about an obsessed gamer who's trapped in the game, to him then suddenly being virtually uploaded, and then there's this storyline where it's like, oh, popped in. By the way, if you die in the game, you die in real life. Like, that's it. You're deleted. And it's kind of that lack of focus and planning that makes it hard to care about the characters, because again, there's no, within that first 75%, there's not a lot of character development either for the main character or for any other of the important characters that end up being there. Character development really doesn't happen until like 75% into the story, and it's kind of late at that point to start your character development stuff. And it's just like, by that time, a lot of people probably have either jettisoned out of the story or just like not followed along. Most of your character development should occur from the very beginning, and there's a little bit of that here, but not a ton. So that's unfortunate, because you want readers to care about what happens to your character. Additionally, about this time, the main character tries to be a hero by suddenly proposing a fundamentally different way of life for the permanent players. And at that point, at the 75% mark of the story really does become more interesting, because it's not just about fighting anymore. But again, that shift just happened so late in the story. It's like, I'm like, oh man, I wish I would have gotten this a little bit early, because it is a good shift in the story. It makes it more interesting than just, killing monsters and going on raids for experience points, which is a lot of what that first 75% is. Just like I said, this could have been a really good story had there just been more character development earlier, had there been more plot a little bit earlier in the story, like making an interesting story besides just an excuse for fights and XP gains. But it is what it is. I wanted to like it, and I try to give a little more wiggle room, because I'm like, okay, this is someone's first novel. That's fine. But I wasn't really entertained, unfortunately. It gets a score of 5 out of 10 for me. And again, like the building blocks for this story to be good are there. It's just like they're kind of in the wrong direction. It really should have been flipped as far as like a lot of these pieces. And it is what it is. We all have an opportunity to learn and change and to grow. And hoping this is an opportunity for the author. That's a score of 5 out of 10 from the Omega Dream, and I certainly hopes he continues to write, because like I said, there's a lot of good pieces here. There you go. Okay, on to our next review. The New Party, Vertim, LitRPG, episode number 1, written by Robert Medham. There you go. This is 29 pages. It is a short story, definitely. It is 99 cents. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. The author's description. The sirens are blazing. The nuclear missiles are on their way. You have only minutes left to live. What do? Play an online fantasy RPG, of course. A virtual time dilation, Vertim, means that even a few minutes of real time can become weeks, months, or years of subjective game time. Ryan is one of those who flee the Holocaust to a Vertim world, but something in the realms of Relonius are very wrong. So there you go. That's the author's description of the short story. And again, this is supposed to be the first episode in a LitRPG series. As far as price goes, it's a little expensive for 29 pages, but Amazon doesn't let you go below 99 cents. It'll just let you put it up for free. So I would say as a Kindle Unlimited read, yeah, it's good. It's just not as a straight purchase, just as like a cost to page ratio. The setup for the premise of Ryan choosing to use time compression in an MMO to extend the last minutes of his life as long as possible, it's a good setup. I actually really like it. It is a really good reason why he wants to be in the game, and why dying in the game actually has consequence. Because if he dies in the game, he gets booted out of the game, and then it's like minutes and minutes of a restarting time. But in the real world, everything's going to be dead soon. Like, there's literally in the game described as you have about 3 to 5 minutes left to live before the nuclear bombs destroy everything. So he chooses to jump into this game because of the time compression issue, or like a minute can be months in this particular game. But dying means going back to the real world and just possibly never having the opportunity to log in again. So it's a really good setup. Along the way, he finds out that the game he'd been playing is different for some reason, and so there's an opportunity for exploration in that direction. Like I said, it's a short story, so not a lot is going to happen. There's a couple fights. He meets a sexy rogue, which is the other person in that not so amazing cover art. And I think there is potential in this series. I had enough enjoyment in it, and there's enough like mystery to be like, okay, I'll probably read episode 2 and see where that goes. But it was just long. Like it kind of barely makes into a 7 out of 10 for me. It was kind of on the edge of like 6.9, 7.0 kind of level of enjoyment. But I'm really okay with short stories. Not everybody is. Not everybody finds them to be meaty enough. A lot of people will like wait until like the series has like 5-10 episodes before they jump in, or there's like an omnibus that kind of collects them together, and that's perfectly cool. But for me, it was entertaining enough. Like the comic's not amazing, but I guess I feel like there was enough potential there for me to be enjoying it and to read the next episode. So it gets a score of 7 out of 10 for me. That's The New Party, Vertim, LitRPG episode number 1 with a score of 7 out of 10. So there we go. On to number 9, our last review. Level Up, written by Craig Anderson. This one is 306 pages, $2.99. It is not available on Kindle Unlimited. So not everybody's going to want to take a chance on it, but I would say give it a try. It's actually very funny and entertaining. Just looking at the cover art is a really good summation of like a lot of the themes in the story. I'll read you the author's description though. Virtual is reality. What would the world be like if video games world suddenly applied? Marcus is about to find out. After a freak accident, he finds himself stuck between a game and the real world. He needs to fight his way through football hooligans, carnies, and the dreaded RNG to get to the final boss and save the world. Anything less means that it's game over for good. Along the way, he'll learn new skills, epic loot, and most importantly of all, he'll level up. So there you go. Okay, this is really a parody novel that crosses Office Space with the gamer. The RPG mechanics in the story aren't anything to write home about. They consist mainly of the main character getting unidentified amounts of experience points, gaining levels, and sometimes in like big chunks of like 3 or 4 times, just to get new abilities. There's not a lot of real depth to the RPG system, but that's fine. That's not the kind of story this is. It's really a parody humor novel that just happens to also be a LitRPG, or at least written in such a way so that it qualifies, and it does qualify technically. The novel makes fun of just about every genre of video games and silly mechanic ever used: beat 'em ups, stealth, base building, card games, mini games, quick time events, escort missions, and so much more. It really combines that kind of humor and parody of those genres with an Office Space type subplot where the main character uses his new game powers to stand up to his jerk coworkers and his boss. My favorite fight in the entire novel is probably the one where he had with human resources. It's really funny. And if you've ever worked in like an office kind of space or a corporate world, you'll kind of have a cathartic connection to it. At least I hope you do. There are a few flaws in the story, of course. No novel's perfect. The combat gets a little over the top and becomes a little repetitive and predictive sometimes. I kind of compare it to like, oh, if you ever seen the movie Scott Pilgrim versus the World, the combat feels like that sometimes, and that it's game centric, but it's very over the top. It's like, okay, that it doesn't quite make sense, but you can tell it's written for entertainment purposes. Some of the parody jokes also get a little repetitive sometimes, and that's just the consequence of this is like 300 pages, so some of the jokes are going to repeat. Some people may not like the fact that the story kind of rushes from genre to genre, and new game rules are applied, and then they're never seen again. And again, this novel goes through a lot of different game systems, whether it's stealth, base building, card games, and sometimes there's like some really cool mechanics there or some really cool things, and then it's like once it moves on though, like those rules and those benefits and those systems just kind of disappear. And it's like, oh, I would have loved to have spent more time there, or and it kind of feels like there's a little bit of inconsistency in the world building, which may bother some people, but I mean, this is again a parody humor story. It's not taking itself very seriously. Overall, I had a fun time reading it. And again, as long as you're not taking the story too seriously, I think you'll probably have a good time reading it as well. It gets a score of 7 out of 10 for me. That's Level Up with a score of 7 out of 10. I had a good time. It was funny for me. There we go. That's it. We are done, ladies and gentlemen. 9 LitRPG reviews for you in less than an hour. That's a pretty good record for me, at least. Thank you very much for listening, for watching the show. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook at LitRPG Podcast, at Twitter at LitRPG Podcast. We also have a YouTube page that's under the Geek Bites Podcast, but we'll link in the show notes for you. There you go. If you want to click on that and watch us on YouTube. We also have a Patreon account. So people who want to donate to help support the podcast in a financial way can go there and do so. You also support the other show I do, Keep Us Podcast, where it's just me goofing around with my friend for some geeky news of the week. But if you enjoy the podcast and you want to support us in any way, shape, or form, you can find all the ways to do so at litrpgpodcast.com/support. So again, thanks everybody for hanging out with me, listening to me go on and on about this genre that I love, LitRPG. Until we can hang out again, ladies and gentlemen, remember to go read some LitRPG. Nope. I messed it up. Okay, sorry. Music.